Okay, it's 2 o'clock. Let's get started for our PR measurement webinar. Thanks for joining us. I'm super excited to talk about all things measurement, finding numbers that matter to your organization, and how to monitor and report on those numbers. So, to start off, we do have a poll question. We're going to pop a few poll questions throughout the webinar on the screen, and it'd be so helpful if you could just quickly answer them. The first one's regarding your measurement challenges. I would love to see what our audience would like to talk about, focusing on their specific measurement challenges, but we're going to talk about all kinds of solutions for your communication. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about what you'll learn today. We'll do questions and answers at the end, and you can also add your questions to the chat box. And today we're going to talk about how to create a communications plan with numbers that matter, using better measurement resources, evaluating and reporting those metrics after your campaign's completed, implementing measurement for your company today. It's really better late than never. We need to do it now for measurement because you have to establish those baselines. So moving forward, you can look back and see where you've come. And then, like I said, at the end, we'll have our question time. Okay, so I am Katie Boyle, so I'm speaking now, and I'm also joined by my colleague, Becca McClure here at Axia.
Hi, guys.
Becca's going to be responding to questions, reading them out loud in the chat box, kind of helping me move through all this fun measurement stuff. So we're both at Axia PR, and we specialize in large companies nationwide providing earned, shared, and owned media services to support their communications plans. Okay, so the first steps, what I'd like to talk about is really important. This is where the foundation of your communication plan starts and where your measuring and evaluation is going to be more valuable because it's going to matter. So what I've got here is your business objectives. Most businesses have goals and plans in mind. For example, they may want to open in new markets, expand store locations, hire 500 new employees. Those are all business goals that are very important and mostly likely in your business plan. So you want to make sure your communication objectives are tied to that and help support those business goals. For example, if your goal is to open 10 new stores in Florida in the next year, you're going to need a communication objective that will help support that. Your communication objective for that could be earning media coverage and increasing awareness in Florida residents since you're entering that new market. That will help support your business and reach your business goals, and it will also provide you meaningful metrics that matter to the boardroom, to your CEO, since he's trying to evaluate and move his business along as well. So to find those numbers that matter, we here at Axia, we have a few questions we like to ask our clients to really help dig deep and find those numbers that matter. For example, who is your ideal client and customer? That really targets your audience so you know exactly who you're trying to talk to and what you need to tell them. You can also ask, who are you trying to inspire or perhaps persuade, change their perception? That will help identify what you need your communication to do. The next question we have is, what do you want them to do or think or feel? So perhaps you just want to tell them about your new company. That would really just be building awareness. Kind of the first step of communication is telling that message. If you want them to change how they think, you're going to have to persuade and change their internal attitudes towards whatever topic you're discussing. That's best measured with surveys and focus groups since it's quantifiable. And then if you want to change their actions, what they do, that's going to be the final kind of highest level metric that we measure is changing behavior. It takes a few steps to get that behavior changed. We also like to ask our clients about the baseline data they use and what KPIs are important to their organization. So we'll ask, what do you measure for your baseline data? That will kind of give us insights. If they're measuring these numbers, it's important to their overall business success. So how can our communication methods support those numbers and tie into the importance of those numbers? And then another great question, really this is a question for all around, what does success look like to you? What is that end picture that your PR plan or your communication plan needs to reach? And that's a really good way to really target down where are we trying to go, and it'll help you identify your strategy and the tactics you'll use to get there, and then find those numbers that you can measure to see if you've reached that end success point. So to collect and track baseline numbers is very important. It's one of the first steps, and that's an action step you can take away today after this webinar. Go track all of your social media followers, how your website traffic, your sales, those kind of numbers. Get a baseline so you know where you're at and what's the average per month. And then whenever there's a change, you can identify, okay, it's increased or decreased, and this could be the reason why. And there's many ways to tie that together, which we'll talk about later. But once you kind of have your business objectives in place and you understand what KPIs your business is already monitoring and tracking, then you can start to talk about SMART objectives. I'm sure we've all heard the term SMART. It stands for specific, achievable, timely, measurable, and realistic. You could also have heard perhaps for the A, achievable or attainable. For the T, timely or time-bound, and the R, realistic or relevant. Sometimes they're changed out, but it really means the same basic thing. It needs to be very specific. It has to have an end goal in picture and make it very clear in that one line objective that you'll plan for in your communication. It needs to be measurable. It means you need to have numbers that are you can find and track weekly, monthly, annually, depending on what that objective is. It needs to be achievable or attainable. Don't set your communication objectives out of the ball field, just like your business plan and your business objectives. They're achievable and attainable. Yes, you could open 10 stores in Florida. So your communication objectives need to be achievable and attainable too. Timely and time-bound is important. What's the end date for this? How long do you have to plan for the objective you're referring to? And then realistic or relevant. Relevant's a great word here. Like we just talked about, tying your communication objectives to your business objectives, making sure those objectives are relevant and they support your business objectives or they support something meaningful to your organization. So we also have a great blog post called Be a Smart Communications Pro I wrote that kind of outlines and defines all of our measurement lingo, breaking down SMART for SMART, along with goals, objectives, strategies, tactics. So you can check that out. I can send a link after our webinar. Next, I want to talk about what kinds of media there are that you can include in your communication plan, and this is where being specific helps. You can really target your objectives to different kinds of media or how you're going to get your message out. As you see here, this is the PESO model. If you're not familiar with it, it's kind of a communication PR industry standard, and it kind of outlines earned, shared, owned, and paid media. Here at Axia, we don't provide any paid media services. That includes like advertising, in any type of incentive-based sponsored content, but we do provide earned media, which is your regular media relations, blogger relations, influencer relations, earned media coverage, shared media, which is your social media, your different channels like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Pinterest, Instagram. Owned media, that's what you can control and manage. That's all kinds of content like your website, your webinars, your resources, your employee stories, your customer stories, any of that content that you can control, brochures, things like that. So when we're talking about measuring communication, it's important to think, how do we get our message out? And these are the usual channels of how you tell your message to that audience, and it will help us when we're discussing measurement. I love lots of measurement resources, and one of my favorites is the AMIC framework. It's an industry best practice. It's free online. This is kind of a screenshot, and it's a great way to really visualize each step of your communication plan, and it's helpful to kind of keep you organized since there are so many different templates and formats. Everyone kind of has their own way of doing it, but this is a great industry standard to use. You can add all of your pieces here, like we talked about for your business objectives. You would add business objectives and your communication objectives here and move through each process, going through to where you can submit it and it becomes a final report, which I do talk about at the end when we mention reporting. Some other great free resources that have tons of measurement information and clarity. PRSA, the Public Relations Society of America, IABC. There's many tools online. I really like a tool called Coverage Bot, where you just insert a link and get some visitor information and circulation numbers. We also have an Axia ebook coming out talking all things measurement, which I'm very excited about. And if you want, you can email me. I think at the end, my email address is listed, and I can give you a list of all these great free resources around measurement. So I wanted to kind of start at the natural way we communicate. This is really just our day-to-day life of how we communicate as people, and then it kind of translate into how we communicate in public relations. So as you can see, the first step when you're talking to someone or a group, you're really just telling your message. You're just talking, they're listening, and they're engaging perhaps. They're nodding their head, they're agreeing or disagreeing. And then step 3, you're influencing them as they listen, engage. Their mind is thinking, they're changing their past perceptions, their behaviors might be, their attitudes might be changing as you dig deeper into the conversation. And then really the step 4 is the action. After they've listened and engaged and influenced from your message, they're taking action. Perhaps they're going to that store you were talking about, going to their social media to check it out themselves, buying a certain product. So kind of as we're talking to people, we move through these 4 stages, just like public relations in our lingo. The same structure here, and I've put in our industry terms that can sometimes be confusing, but I'm hoping to make it more natural. The first step, like we talked about, you're telling your friends, is when you're telling the message. You're talking, they're being exposed to that message. And in communications and what we do, this is considered, news releases, earning media coverage, social media posts, email marketing. You're really just talking, and your audience is being exposed to that message. The second step is they're engaging with that. Maybe they're understanding what you're saying and they have an interest or liking. Perhaps they're sharing it on social media. Perhaps they're signing up for your email newsletter. That's when they hear your message and they're doing something to consider it. Then it moves to the third stage, which we consider outcomes, and that's where you've influenced them and you've kind of changed the behavior, the attitude already. That's where you can measure trust, preference, attitude change, or advocacy. This is, I would say, the third step as we have here, and it takes the previous 2 steps to get here. Just like for number 4, action, they've heard your message, you've influenced their attitude about it, and this is when they take action. Perhaps your sales increase, your employee intention increases, your reputation increases. This is the 4th stage, and I would say what would the word be? The strongest or the most impactful. Ironically, it's called impacts. Most impactful stage. When you've successfully communicated your company's message, this is what you ideally want is that your customer or your target audience taking action. Okay, so our measurement process, step for step, this is how we work at Axia Public Relations, and this is also in line with AMEC, the Association for Measurement, their best practices in their process. So you can also, just like the tool I showed earlier, the AMEC framework, this follows that same plan. And we're going to kind of walk through it so you can see the process of planning and measuring, and how you get that final numbers that matters to your boardroom. The first step would be your objectives. We talked about supporting your organizational communication objectives. Then what do you need to prepare for your communication? That's gonna be whether it be creating social media pages, starting email marketing. How are you gonna do this, and what resources do you need? Your activities is actually putting together that messaging, things you develop, your planning, your production, your research. And then here's where the measurement comes in. Your outputs, what you distribute, and what the message was that your audience received. You can measure distribution, exposure, reception. Impressions are a common way to measure media coverage. And for social media, reach is a common way that's measured there. For outtakes, what does your audience do with your communication? Are they engaging with that? Perhaps you're measuring the awareness, the understanding, their liking. If they're engaging with that, perhaps they're sharing it or emailing it or forwarding it. Are they participating in events? Are they considering your product or service? Perhaps it's increased website traffic. Number 6, outcomes, the effect your communication has on audiences. That's where we influence them, like we talked about previously. And it's increased learning or knowledge. The attitude is changing, trust, preference, intention, advocacy. Online reviews are a great way to kind of show the increased reputation through PR programs. And then the final, and I'd say most significant step, that the most, I would say, challenging to reach, but it's going to matter to the boardroom the most, is impacts. And that's how it directly affected the company or the organization around it. So did they have increased reputation? Was there increased sales, increased social change or public change on a topic that could be challenging? That's really where you change that behavior and encourage your audience to take action. Okay, so during your PR campaign, it's important to monitor and consistently measure your numbers. So you're kind of tracking and seeing what's happening. So I wanted to include this. This is from our monitoring software, Meltwater. As you can see, let's talk about media exposure. Green is media exposure and blue is social chatter. So you can see how when there's an article and more media content, social chatter is up, which is good. You could also positively show this with positive content analysis of what people are talking about. Perhaps it's keywords that are important to your organization. So that directly shows how media coverage, that output, is directly increasing what people are saying about your company. And then seeing action that's changed with Google Analytics. There you could also do other website tools to measure website traffic. But as you can see, orange is news coverage and blue is the website traffic. So when an article published, there was significant increase in website traffic here, and you can directly tie that to your PR efforts when you put both of those together and see them side by side. You can directly correlate, how important that media coverage, that media exposure is, and how it directly turns into referral sessions and online traffic, and perhaps even increasing sales. If you looked at sales for this same month, you could perhaps see a sales spike. So that would be a great way to identify a number that matters to the boardroom. And then other things to do during your campaign, you want to make sure you're monitoring. You can use tools like Google Alerts is free, and you can type in any key terms you'd like to monitor for. Perhaps it's your CEO's name or your company name or key terms in your industry. TalkWalker is also a free monitor, just to have an alternate monitor going. You wouldn't want to miss any incidents where your company is being talked about and you're not even aware. Meltwater and Cision are tools that are also used for media monitoring and catching that media coverage and counting those impressions, and they're very helpful to see visuals like this side by side with your Google Analytics and everything. When you're talking about these numbers, it's important to have some kinds of insights, just like, yes, media coverage is great, and yes, website traffic's great, but when you put those together, it provides the kind of full story. Oh, this article published, and then everyone went to our website or our social media. You can tell the story of those numbers and kind of what happened and how your communication is how it happened. So it's really important to show changes over time or tell the story. Why did they change? And ask those questions too to yourself. So I want to just recap. So far, we've talked about um, catching baseline numbers and establishing those baseline numbers and KPIs that are important, what questions to ask to identify numbers that are going to be key for you to measure, creating SMART objectives, and what different types of objectives, whether it be talking about outputs, outtakes, outcomes, or impacts. So here's a sample report I wanted to show how we give numbers that matter to our clients. And this is a media relations client. We track the number of articles since that is important to them. We also track impressions since the campaigns really are about increasing awareness. And so they really want to reach as many people as possible. Social shares, that's a high number, and that shows the engagement and the support of that audience who's hearing the media coverage or hearing their name in the news, and then they're sharing it and talking about it on social media. And then really just our activities, which includes media pitching and direct contacts and additional activities, which we use to put those communication outputs together. Okay, this is the AMIC framework. I wanted to talk a little bit about reporting because you spend all this time putting these numbers together and finding the numbers that matter and monitoring for them. So presenting those numbers to your managers or putting them in a one-page sheet for you to understand your communication, how it's working, I think is very important. And so visually, AMIC framework is a great free tool to use where you can insert each item and have everything kind of categorized nicely, and it keeps you on track. And as you can see, it's still in the same order that we discussed. That first step of telling your message, the output. The second step of your audience hearing and understanding. Your third step of your audience being influenced by your message. And then your fourth step, your audience actually taking action from that message. So this is a great way to keep everything organized. Okay, so today there's a few things that you could go back to your office and do. I would love it if you looked at your communication plan, your communication objectives, and look at your business objectives and really work to make those tie together and show that your communication objectives are fully supporting your business plan. I also want to make sure they're smart. Remember that specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. Make sure you have a objective that reads, to increase awareness 15% in women in Florida by December 2018. It should really be a one sentence, each piece of SMART in it, and making sure that you have that time-bound date that you can measure to and see if you've reached it by the end of your day. You could also input your plan into the AMIC framework today. It's available online all of the time. And if you have that communication plan, I would strongly suggest to put it in the framework and kind of see where there may be gaps or where you're over planning for. It's a great way to understand each step of your communication when you're telling your message to your audiences. And then also, I think you should identify what you want your audiences to do. Really ask yourself, do you want your audience to just listen? Do you want them to engage? Do you want them to be influenced and change their attitude? Or do you want some type of action from them? And in order to do that, it does take steps and have that clear, smart objective around each what activity you want your audience to do. And then also just make sure you have all your monitors set up in Google Alerts or in your media monitoring software, and check in through your marketing efforts, whether it be, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, something consistent to where you're before the end of the campaign, you're coming back and checking those numbers. So I just wanted to add, at our agency, Axia here, we do weekly activity reports, monthly metric reports, quarterly success reports, and then the yearly campaign reports. And each of those are measuring the exact same metrics, and reporting on those same numbers, and we're providing the year-to-date numbers so you can see how whatever KPIs are important to you, how they're increasing or perhaps falling behind, and how long it is till you reach that goal. It's a great way to keep us on track. So here's my email address. If you would like to email me about the free PR measurement resources list, I'd be happy to share it. There's tools that I use, and we use at Axia. And so if you need some new tools or want to change up your measuring practices, feel free to shoot me an email. Also, Becca, do we have any questions or anything?
We do have one question from Matt. Matt says, how do I measure website traffic?
Oh, that's a great question, Matt. So website traffic is something every communications pro needs to be doing. It's so important because nowadays people automatically go to Google or directly to your website or even your social media, which links back to your website anyway. So website traffic is one of the first reactions people do when they find something that they're interested in. So I would suggest Bitly links is a great way to add link tracking. If you're sharing a direct link to a landing page, you can track that traffic back. Google Analytics does a great job of, showing where your visitors are coming from, when they're coming, who they are. And then if you have any type of uh, software on your website, for example, we use HubSpot, and it does a great job of providing those link tracking and website monitors for viewer page views and who's visiting your website. So you could use Bitly, Google Analytics, or HubSpot. Hope that's great.
We just got another question in from Sarah. Sarah wants to know, how often should I look at metrics?
Oh, that's a good question, Sarah. So as long as you're consistent, and I'm saying consistent, meaning at least I would say monthly minimum. At Axia, we do weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually, and we kind of already have that framed out. I would include that in your communication plan when you're planning ahead or when you're revisiting your 2018 communication plan. I would say kind of add in checkpoints, whether it be after a big announcement or after opening a certain amount of stores. And you want to make sure you're consistently monitoring and have access to those numbers. So if there was ever any question or something that was unexpected, you could jump right back and check your metrics and make sure you're on track for your goal. Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. I enjoy talking PR measurement. Feel free to email us, and we've had a great time. Thank you.